Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we're going to talk about a series of stories that appeared in UFO Magazine in 1998. It was a story that was broken up into three parts. The first part appeared in the May-June issue. The second part appeared in the September issue. And the third part appeared in the December issue of that year. This is something that has been talked about a lot by Richard Dolan. And these stories center on this fictional character named Sedge Masters, an intelligence official who was read in on the secret control UFO program called Zodiac, and he's given various assignments in these stories. And the interesting thing about it is that nothing is solved. There's nothing at all solved, and it makes me wonder, after reading through these stories, I think that's probably how it still is for the secret control group. They probably still don't understand what these beings are, where they're coming from, how they evolved, who made them, or what they're doing, how their craft operate. I'm sure there's still a lot of questions that are unanswered, and that's one of the reasons, atop the reverse engineering aspect, that they don't want to tell the public, because they have no real answers to give them. And that's how this story plays out. You think you're going to get answers, but you don't. And that's what I really liked about it, because it seemed very realistic to me. And apparently it is. It's actually not only, as Richard Dolan points out, this stuff was actually mentioned in the Wilson Davis notes. Eric Davis, of course, had interviewed Admiral Thomas Wilson back in the early 2000s about the UFO control group and the gatekeepers, and one of the things that were mentioned in the notes was this series of stories. Actually, in particular, Davis points out that he did mention this stuff, this Sedge Masters stuff, to Thomas Wilson in those notes. So it is mentioned in there, and it's also something that the Robert Bigelow, his NIDS group, was very interested in. People like Hal Puthoff believe that these series of stories were based on truth. And I guess, why wouldn't they? Because if now this woman who worked for TRW, Mary Elliot, she tells this information to her attorney, and he's fascinated by it, and he decides to put it down in writing, and he creates this fictional story all around what he learned from her. And that's basically what's going on here. But anyway, I want to go through some of this and talk about it, because I just think it's fascinating. And I do highly recommend anybody who's interested in this subject, if you haven't already, you got to check it out. Of course, I'll leave the link in the description so you could check it out for yourself. Richard Dolan has the whole thing on a PDF. But the first part of the story, I'll give a little breakdown here. The first part pretty much deals with the Sedge Masters being read in on the program under guard. He's given he's told he needs to read this documentation, and he's brought to a room where the stuff is laid out on a table, and basically what you read is what he's reading. That's the first part of the story. The second part of the story deals with Masters trying to he's basically assigned to try to get an answer from these members of a recovery team that had gone to a crash site in the Midwest, and they all lost an hour and a half time. There was missing time. And then part three, I thought, when you get to part three, you think you're going to get an answer to that, and you don't. You don't get an answer to it. In fact, there's other assignments that Masters gets involved in, and you don't get answers to those either. And I think that's probably how it is. And that's what that's one of the fascinating aspects to this, to these series of stories. But I want to go through some of this, because a lot of it just rings very true. Here, anyway, it starts off in the first story. It says here, there was a note here from UFO Magazine. It says, "What you are about to read is largely unverified, but that doesn't mean it's not true. It's the type of UFO information that would typically be deeply buried, then carefully studied and compartmentalized by a small faction within the intelligence community, as suits any sensitive black operation. As such, straightforward corroboration is difficult at best. But UFO Magazine has the advantage of more than a decade's worth of collected bits of information and broad-based facts on which to construct some fair extrapolations. Drawn from a range of sources, the following incident reflects upon one of the blackest of American covert operations that deal directly with the UFO phenomenon." Then it starts off with this Sedge Masters being brought in, and he's brought to a room where he's told to read this documentation, and he reads this letter. And here's what the letter says. It says, Dear Mr. Masters, consider this a deeper introduction to your present assignment. As you were told in last week's special briefing, you were selected for the program less for your wide intelligence background and technical skills than for the results of your psychological profile, both the one you took when you first joined the agency and the one administered earlier this year, necessarily limited to technical experts and professionals and only a handful of military, scientific, and medical disciplines. The program nevertheless cannot sacrifice its dependence on absolute secrecy and the personality traits that go with that exceptionally crucial need. I and my colleagues want to congratulate you on nearly half a lifetime of unwavering circumspection in regard to the restricted information to which you have been privy. From the long list of classified technology to the panoply of trade craft which you have successfully and courageously practiced in many areas of the globe. What you'll be doing with us should be regarded as a complete change not only in your understanding of conventional tradecraft, but in the very attitudes and habits that you have come to accept as SOP in your work. We're dealing with something that falls well outside the normal boundaries of classical espionage and counter-espionage as practiced since the advent of World War II, and yet has always been included within the classified mission statements of the various agencies and military branches comprising the intelligence community since before the formation of the agency in 1947. The program has been carried on since then, albeit without acknowledgement or broad dissemination within the community itself, for reasons which will be obvious as you read the material below. Let me just stop there for a second. Now, you could actually imagine if you're going to be brought in on such a program like what the UFO program, the secret control group. This sounds like reasonable, doesn't it? I think it does. But anyway, continuing here, it says, it must be emphasized that a good deal of the information set forth below is of the highest significance to the national security and cannot be divulged, even to those of your associates and colleagues in the community in whom you repose implicit confidence, without authorization being given to you. We will discuss more about the established protocol for this in the days ahead. For now, refer to the attached appendix A, in which you'll find details on the use of the application of code words, the protocols of formal introductions, and parameters of discussion derived therefrom. Any breaches of the conditions or the protocol therein will be dealt with as a security crime, even if committed inadvertently, with the severest consequences to you and any recipient of the information contained in the communication, regardless of whether the recipient solicited the information. Then it goes on, it gives a history of it talks about World War II and about some of the initial sightings of UFOs, of flying saucers. And it says here, at the time, little could be confirmed about the reports of unidentifieds. The persons offering the reports were not professional espionage agents, and in any case found it difficult to elicit much information which could be of use in assessing the nature of the sightings. Military intelligence made modest efforts to flesh out these empirical reports, but little information was developed. In retrospect, the most ominous of the reports claimed that a downed saucer-like craft of indeterminate origin was recovered by the Wehrmacht troops in the days immediately preceding Germany's invasion of Poland. Now, that some of these things I think they could be embellishments for the story, but hey, maybe there is something to that. Maybe there was something that was recovered by the Nazis in 1939. Who knows? But anyway, continuing here, it says, the rush of events focused the attention of the military and the OSS on other matters of more pressing concern, although it had been resolved to look into these reports again at the war's conclusion. The need to follow up on these matters was underscored by the appearance of the so-called Foo Fighters, which shadowed military aircraft of all combatants during the war in both the European and Pacific theaters. Naturally, each side assumed that the devices were new weapons of the other side. And then it has, see attached Appendix B for censored press reports and military intelligence reports pertaining to the Foo Fighter phenomenon and the apparently related phenomena which were the subject of Project Twinkle. At the conclusion of World War II, it became apparent that the German Nazi regime had been developing a number of advanced missile and aircraft designs, a few of which such as the jet fighters and the flying wings, had been developed in parallel, although somewhat belatedly, in the United States and United Kingdom. Nevertheless, it was clear that extensive technological intelligence gathering would be necessary to determine the full extent of German technological advances in these and other areas. The effort was both impelled and hampered by worsening relations between the Western Allies and the USSR, initially played out in occupied Germany, where most of the investigating work was being pursued. With the beginning of the Cold War, virtually all access to German investigation sites in the Soviet zone of occupation was denied to Allied intelligence and military personnel. And there the matter might have rested, but for the Project Twinkle phenomenon's occurrence and the sighting by private pilot Kenneth Arnold in summer of 1947, that's when things changed, as we all know. So that's most certainly true. It says, but before there could be a full assessment of the implications of these events, in July 1947, 2 craft were recovered from the desert near the Roswell Army Air Corps bomber base. One of the craft was a deltoid wing lifting body, which had suffered a rupture to the crew compartment and some impact distortion, but which was otherwise intact. The other craft had completely disintegrated either before or upon impact. So basically they're talking here about the Roswell crash, and they're saying it's 2 saucers crashed into each other. That's what the suggestion is. Just like the late Stanton Friedman used to say, he believed that it was always 2 saucers crashed into each other. But he had different ideas. He believes that it was 2. Stanton Friedman's belief was that there were 2 full crafts that were recovered in different areas out in the desert. Here it seems like in this story here that's being presented, it makes it sound like the stuff, the wreckage that was found strewn all over the Foster Ranch and discovered by Mac Brazel, that was one craft, and then the other craft was the one that settled down to Earth 45 miles just north of Roswell, where the bodies, and one of them was alive, were discovered. Anyway, continuing here, it says, the other craft had completely disintegrated either before or upon impact, although there were working hypotheses that these craft were either 1, secret Soviet surveillance craft designed to spy upon the many advanced technical and military facilities in that region, 2, craft from some other dimension, the details of which were and remain unspecified by the proponents of this hypothesis, or 3, craft from our own future exploring the past through an unknown temporal travel mechanism. It soon became clear that these craft were from some planet or solar system other than our own, as they were occupied by 2 kinds of beings, which clearly were not of earthly origin. The occupants of the deltoid craft were largely intact after the crash. When the special recovery team established for this purpose located the crash, 2 of the occupants of the deltoid craft were still alive, although one was badly injured and would later die upon being taken to the Roswell Air Corps base. The other survivor was alive and remained so for almost 30 days after the crash. I just want to point out something here. It's interesting. The one that was, they say that there was one that stayed alive, and there were witnesses that have been people, researchers like Donald Schmidt and Thomas Carey, and they had a number of different books on the Roswell incident. And there was one incident, one story where not long after that crash, there were a group of young Army Air Force personnel that were shown a live extraterrestrial, and that was it. And then they were asked to give their opinions. There was a story like that, and that jibes with this story here in a way. And here we'll continue. Here it says, the other survivor was alive and remained so for almost 30 days after the crash. It was able to walk and seemed to understand that it was a captive among intelligent beings like itself. All efforts at communication with the survivor were inconclusive and largely unsuccessful. The 3 other occupants were dead when the recovery team found them. So they're talking about altogether 5 beings. One survived for 30 days. The other one was still alive when they found it, but died shortly thereafter. And there were 3 other dead ones. The general appearance of these creatures was as reported in the recently published, somewhat fanciful investigative books on the subject, which have received a certain amount of popular acceptance and which resulted in the recent 50th anniversary celebration of this event. Popular attention to this event remains strong. Now, this, of course, 1998 when these stories came out, that was the 50th anniversary of Roswell, and it was a big deal that year. That's when we got in 1997, that's when the Air Force told us to lie about the crash test dummies that they were tossing out of from high altitudes in the 1950s, and they tried to tell everyone that that's what that they were the aliens that people saw in 1947, basically time traveling aliens, but they were really crash test dummies. Ridiculous. Anyway, continuing. The occupants of the second craft were not found for several more days, as their bodies had been ejected in what appeared to be safety pods similar in purpose to those later employed in such high-performance aircraft as the B-58 Hustler and XB-70 supersonic bombers. These creatures were longer in dimension than the ones of the deltoid craft, and their bodies were dispersed over a much wider area due to the disintegration of their craft. All were dead when found, with their bodies much deteriorated from prolonged exposure to the elements, and some having been partially eaten by coyotes and other creatures, all of the latter of which were found dead near the alien corpses. Analysis of the animal remains and the alien bodies led to the conclusion that the animals died from poisoning caused by ingestion of chemicals in the alien flesh. It appeared that the second group of aliens could not survive if exposed to the Earth's atmosphere. The need to remove all evidence of the event from the two crash sites limited the amount of crash reconstruction which could be accomplished by the recovery team, with the consequence that it has never been made clear what exactly caused the crash. Unfortunately, the large number of civilian and military personnel who witnessed physical evidence of the crash sites and back at the Roswell base created a significant security hazard, which was dealt with by intimidation and bribery of the witnesses to the extent that those means proved effective. And that's, let me just stop there for a second. Yes, there were people who were bribed. Obviously, we've heard of that one before. A lot of soldiers, a lot of army personnel were bribed. They were. It's been said there was several witnesses who said that they received $10,000 to keep quiet about anything that they saw in Roswell, while citizens at the time were intimidated and threatened, as we all know. Anyway, continuing here, it says, until unofficial investigators, journalists, writers, and others began renewing investigation of the subject in the early 1980s, these techniques were largely successful in keeping the truth of the Roswell event from the public, as well as its ominous implications. The autopsies on the bodies of the creatures showed that they were of very light build and clearly not from this planet. The simplicity of their brain structures and non-communication in the face of stalwart efforts by researchers led investigators at the time to conclude that they were not the original designers and builders of the craft involved in the incident. Rather, it seemed that they were, quote, biological robots designed and bred for the purpose of undertaking such dangerous missions as flying through the atmosphere of an alien world. Let me just stop there for a second. Of course, biological robots, that's what Gary Nolan talks about all the time. He thinks that they are biological robots. I wonder if Gary Nolan read this. I'm sure that he has. The survivor finally died when its body accumulated toxic waste products from its metabolism. There were no apparent excretory system or sexual organs. Consistent with this biological robot hypothesis was the complete absence of any galley or food stores aboard the craft. Of course, the possibility of there being a mothership from which these craft came was also considered, as was the less likely possibility that these small craft could themselves attain transluminal speeds. Now let me just stop there. That's very interesting. No food on board the craft. That sounds that's probably what's going on. They died. The survivor finally died when his body accumulated toxic waste from its metabolism. We've heard different stories about are these they wear something on their bodies to hold it in, right? Is there something, the smell of ammonia on some of these creatures? Is that it's all? This is something from 1998. It sounds it sounds plausible to me. The propulsion system of the craft, of obvious priority interest to her group, was indeterminate for long after its recovery. While still subject to the laws of physics as we imperfectly understand them, the craft's workings went far beyond our technological grasp at that time. Unfamiliar, nearly magical technology was displayed. Devices that we now know as integrated circuits, fiber optics, super tenacious fibers and metals, and an unfathomable power source and drive mechanism, as well as other technology, which it is not necessary to discuss in this document. The military implications of the presence of these craft in our atmosphere and the possibility that they may have established friendly communications with our Cold War enemies were obvious and unsettling. The discovery of these craft led to an equally unsettling re-examination of the European intelligence reports referred to above, as well as the post-war investigation by General Jimmy Doolittle of the Ghost Rockets of Norway. The president was made aware of these developments and ordered the formation of a special group of prominent scientists, cabinet, military, and intelligence officers. The popular literature bandies about the name of Majestic 12 or MJ-12 for this special secret task force formed by the president. Other names by which it has been identified in the public mind through disinformation programs are Project Saucer and Aquarius. While it is possible that any one or more of these was the name of the group at one time, for most of its existence, the code name for the group and the extensive program which it spawned has been and still is Zodiac, with each of its operational subdivisions known by the name of a different zodiacal sign, including Aquarius. And then it goes on and continues with how Zodiac has evolved throughout the years. It says the operational involvement of high government officials in Zodiac waned to a certain degree, especially with the conclusion of the Eisenhower administration, although most presidents were still kept informed of key overview facts as they came to light. However, it fell to the agency's supervisors of Zodiac to determine who else in the government should have access to this very closely held and highly compartmentalized information, to the point that, like the heads of military intelligence before World War II, they sometimes decided not to share information with certain presidents, including Nixon and Ford. All other presidents were kept reasonably well informed, including Jimmy Carter, who went back on his pledge to reveal all of the information the government had on UFOs once he was elected president. Now, as you read through this right now, I could see like this. The author, I mean, I believe what you're seeing here. I think that there's a lot of fictional here, there's a lot of supposition. I think he did embellish some things, right? Of course, the story is fictional. The characters, Sedge Masters is fictional, all of that, right? But I think he did to fill in the holes. He probably came up with some of his own ideas. But I think for the most part, I think what you're getting here, the description of the aliens, the some of the things that they that happen, I think, in crash retrievals and some of the incidents that they investigate. I think that these things are based on fact by things that Mary Elizabeth Elliot had relayed on to him. That's what I believe here. Anyway, we're going to skip forward here a little bit. It says here, it says here with the as of the early 1980s, the agency exercised complete control over Zodiac with the cooperation of the rest of the intelligence community and the military branches, particularly the Air Force and the Navy. From 1947 to the early 1980s, Zodiac recovered 11 other alien craft in various states of disrepair, from a diminutive single-seat flying wing to a rather large craft that had to be trucked into Wright-Patterson by dead of night. Some craft were turned over to our government by friendly powers, most notably Denmark, which allowed the United States to retrieve a rather large disk that had been submerged off the Danish coast. Occasionally, a live craft occupant was recovered as well. Now, I wonder about this Denmark claim. Is that something that really happened and was relayed to to Griffith by Elliot, or did he just change the location? Maybe it wasn't Denmark. Maybe he's talking about somebody else. Maybe he had to mix it up a little bit, change some things around so as to not. Maybe draw too much attention from the intelligence community. Goes on here. It says there are ongoing efforts to discover the technological secrets of the recovered craft and to reverse engineer them or their subsystems, but so far these efforts have met with a limited success. The materials, technology, and knowledge of physics of the builders of the craft still present considerable obstacles to matching their observed performance characteristics. Besides the technology, the beings found with these craft are central to the program's investigations. There seem to be at least 4 types of occupants, the 2 described above, as well as the humanoids that appear to be almost human and Nordic in appearance, and small, strong, hairy ones. There may be others, but these are all that have been recovered to date. It is possible that one or more of these types represent only a subtype of the others. There is no evidence of a telepathic communication abilities of these creatures, speculation in the popular literature notwithstanding. However, there is some sort of empathetic manipulation and thought control ability as detailed below and in various attached appendices. Details of the following incident should be carefully considered and recalled, as they will be useful to you during the first phases of your assignment. As you progress, you'll be regularly debriefed and subsequently introduced to new phases, each of which may or may not have any direct relevance to what has gone before. As such, each anecdote like the following is to be utilized strictly for the discrete phase which it introduces, unless you're instructed otherwise. Any deviation from the practice and attitude will be clearly evident and will result in your immediate termination. I just want to stop there for a second and go back to this, what he was talking about here with the there's no evidence of telepathic communication. That's very interesting. Instead, it's empathetic manipulation and thought control ability. So I guess, a lot of people say that they, people who are abducted say they actually hear things that it feels like they're being told instructions or told to calm down, don't worry, you won't be harmed. But what they're saying here, what they discovered, at least at this time, if this is true, is that they don't really have telepathic abilities. It's more of an empathetic manipulation. And that does play a part here in this story, too, later on. Also, thought control. That's another interesting aspect here that's discussed. I'd love to know more about this stuff. I would love to see the real documentation already. I'm tired of this cover-up. Anyway, here it says, by the late 60s, Zodiac had been able to recruit members of an elite recovery team. 67 well-trained men were dispatched to the sites of crash landings and had by the 1970s perfected the tasks of completely and thoroughly documenting all actions and cleaning up any debris remaining after these incidents. The efficiency, trustworthiness, and expertise of these men was and is unquestioned. Within the last 48 hours, the team was dispatched to a remote site in the Midwest where a craft and bodies were collected and ferried to the appropriate locations, seemingly without incident. These men always comply with strict directions to document practically every single minute of these operations. They are debriefed immediately after each operation. This time, it's become clear to our debriefing teams at Wright-Patterson that the first members questioned could not account for an hour and a half's worth of time spent at the site. The pattern of forgetfulness was exact, with every team member debriefed as far. Debriefings were cut off for the day. You have been selected to be part of a newly formed debriefing team whose task will be correlation and analysis of these events. Clearly, the commonality of the gap in memory among the team members was induced somehow, either by some sort of localized phenomenon having nothing to do with the recovered craft or by contact with the downed craft. But these two options are tentatively rejected for lack of supporting evidence. We never encountered this phenomenon before. We fully appreciate that you have been introduced to this material on a rather short-term basis. Ordinarily, your introduction to this information would be more gradual, but we have no time. We need to get to the bottom of this in short order. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of this, but you're getting the idea. I just want to say this, is that what's interesting to me, and when you get to part 2, this Sedge Masters, who was given this letter to read, basically meets with some of the top people in the team that experience the missing time, and he can't remember. I mean, the guy, he doesn't remember he can't account for the 90 minutes. But then the next day when he wakes up, he remembers that he's now allowed to tell his superiors about it. I mean, and you have to wonder, is that something that's happened? Basically, what this guy says is that when they were there to retrieve this craft, and they take all these detailed notes as they go through it, at some point this mothership came, hovered over the crash site, and while there was no telepathic communication, all the men there, while they're pointing their rifles at this craft, this giant mothership hovering over them, they felt that the beings inside the mothership were very unhappy with them being there and doing what they were doing. and it was some sort of empathetic communication that was ongoing. But still, it didn't account for the entire hour and a half. And then this story goes on to where Sedge Masters wants to use drugs, not just hypnosis, maybe hypnosis and drugs, to try to get more information potentially from these from the team members that were there that had the missing time. But it never. Well, and part 2 ends that way. And I was thinking when I get to part 3, I'm going to learn. Okay, what happened in that missing time? But guess what? You don't learn. And then it goes on to other stuff. Masters attempts to try to get his superiors to allow him to use drugs on these guys. It's never granted, and instead he goes on to some other assignments where there's no answers to some of these either. In fact, in one part he's brought into a building where there's a craft and he could hear it's running. You can hear a humming sound, and he's told that they inadvertently turned this on over a year ago or something like that, a long time ago, and it's been running like that for a year. They're afraid to touch any more buttons because they don't know what's going to happen. That's the kind of stuff that's in this story, which I found fascinating, because isn't that how it would be? It's very well written. I have to imagine what happened here. I mean, if this this woman who this Mary Elizabeth Elliot, this TRW employee who relayed this story to this attorney Jeffrey Griffith, I mean, they must have sat down and talked about this for a long time. He must have took a lot of notes, and he put this into a format, a fictional format, to tell a story about what's going on behind the scenes with these secret clandestine programs, UFO secret control group, what they do and how they operate, and the importance of maintaining the secret. And there was another interesting aspect in the part 3 of the story too, where he's working with someone else investigating some strange UFO events and encounters with beings, and he almost slips. His tongue almost slips. He almost tells her about the incident with the soldiers who had the missing time, but she wasn't authorized to hear that. And of course, earlier on in the letter that he received for his assignment, it was stated clearly that, hey, you'll be removed, you'll be terminated, you'll be terminated from this post, from this assignment if you can't tell anybody. Even some people are read in on only portions of it, like this one colleague that he was working with at one point, but he couldn't tell. There was things that he knew that she didn't know, and he couldn't tell her. It's very interesting. And again, there's no answers to anything. He doesn't get to the bottom of any of these assignments that he goes on. There's no answers, and nobody in the government seems to have any answers. They don't know how some of these things work. They don't know what happened with with that team, the recovery team, that had the missing time. No answers, and I love that about it. And that's why, to me, there was this sense of realism. There's a sense of most certainly like this could be, and that case there that he's talking about with the missing time of the recovery team, you could imagine something like that happen. Because I always wonder, like, how come these things crash sometimes, but it seems like how could we recover them? These beings aren't coming back for them. In some cases, potentially they do. And things happen, or maybe they don't care. Or who knows what's going on? What the what these beings are thinking, or why they do the things that they do. But this sounds like something. It smacks of reality to me. Like, this is something that, if it were to happen, this seems like this could have been how it went down, and that's why I enjoyed it so much. But so I highly recommend that you check out this. I mean, there's a lot more to this, of course. I just wanted to give you an idea of what it was with that first. That was just segments from the first part. There's still part 2 and then part 3. Part 3, I believe, was probably the longest part. I think anybody who's interested in this subject should check this out. And basically, because of the fact that, as Richard Dolan puts it, it's not so fictional. That a lot of this stuff that you're reading in here are things that are real. These are things that are really happened, that were experienced from this former TRW employee who's not with us anymore. It's unfortunate that this Jeffrey Griffith doesn't want to talk about how he came about with writing this story, and why you could understand why he would write it under a pseudonym. It's very interesting stuff. I highly recommend it. Hey, one more thing before I go. I want to talk about a comment I received from one of my followers, Utah John 777. He talks about an incident that a friend had while he was going to college. And I thought this was a very strange encounter, and I thought I would share it with everyone. I never heard of anything like this before. John says, when I was in college, I was having trouble in Calc 2. The math department referred me to a list of tutors they had. I called the guy on the list who was working on his master's in mathematics and tutoring on the side. Tim, which is a pseudonym, helped me that year. He was sane and sober. We became friends. Around a year later, this was around the time that Bob Lazar came out with his stories, I asked Tim what he thought about that stuff. He looked at me seriously and said I wouldn't believe what happened to him. He was teaching in New York City. He would have to walk to the subway every morning. One morning, he approached the station and a bunch of thugs were standing by the entrance. He decided to cut through a long, narrow alley and go to a different station. As he walked into the alley, he had the feeling someone was approaching him from behind. He thought the thugs may have followed him. As he turned his head to look behind him, something gray insect-like, about 3 feet tall, jumped on his back and stabbed in the back of his neck with something sharp. Something stabbed him in the back of the neck with something sharp. Just as quick as this happened, before he had time to react, the creature was off him and turning out of the alley and running out of the alley ahead of him, running faster than any human could. He got a good look at it when it moved in front of him. He was in a state of shock as he got on the subway train, mumbling to himself, apparently so shook up and ranting about being attacked that everyone in the car distanced themselves from him. He told me this was the only strange experience he ever had, and he was a very sane person. So nobody is exempt from any of these kind of encounters, even in the middle of a city, like New York City, walking down an alley and some kind of a weird 3-foot tall insect-like being jumped on this guy's back, stabbed him in the neck with something, and then took off running in front of him. Amazing story. I want to say Utah John is someone who's been following me on YouTube for quite a while now. He's always been giving me good comments, so I have every reason to believe the story is absolutely true. So thank you very much, Utah John, for sharing that. I don't know what to say about it. It's just yet another weird story to add to the other many thousands and millions of other weird stories, weird encounters that people have with these weird beings that are among us. Anyway, I want to say thank you everyone for joining me. Until next time.